Hello, friends. I hope you're well and that you've had a great week of learning at school. Last week in church, we heard the story of how God provided food for the Hebrew people who'd been slaves in Egypt and were now living in the desert. This week, we get another story from the desert. And I thought I'd call my friend Pamela, who lives in Australia, who knows a thing or two about living in the desert. Uh-oh. I suddenly remembered about that time difference when our friends, the Saytallers, were living in Newcastle, Australia. I always had to arrange ahead of time or I'd end up calling in the middle of the night. Oh, hi Pamela. It's Cheryl calling from Canada.
Canada?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I always forget about the time difference. Did I wake you?
Cheryl, yes, it's the middle of the night.
Oh, were you sleeping?
Well, that is what camels do in the night. And I was having such a wonderful dream about cake.
That sounds like a wonderful dream, Pamela. I'm sorry to wake you. And it's just, the kids and I are hearing the stories from Exodus about the Hebrew people living in the desert. And I thought, you're practically an expert about living in the desert.
Well, that I am. I live in the red desert of Australia.
Yeah, I think that's Ayers Rock behind you, isn't it?
Yes, isn't it pretty? With the sun rising over it, Cheryl?
Yeah.
And did you know, Cheryl, the Aboriginal people of Australia have another name for it? It's not Ayers Rock, it's called Uluru.
Oh, that's interesting. Pamela, last week the story from the Bible was about people living in the desert. And I imagine living in the desert or surviving in the desert is especially hard, especially if you've lived in a city your whole life. It might be quite challenging.
Oh my word, yes. We get lots of people here who come as tourists and they are completely unprepared.
We heard the story last week that the people didn't have enough to eat. They were hungry and complaining, but God heard their cries and provided them with quail and a sticky, flaky substance that was on the ground every morning. They called it manna, which means, what is it? Because they didn't know what it was. But in this week's story, things are even worse. They've run out of water in the desert.
In the desert? Why, they are doomed. They have 3 days, 4 tops.
Oh, that's pretty dire.
Did you know, Cheryl, the survival rules of 3 for you humans? In a harsh climate, you can survive only 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, and only 3 weeks without food.
Wow, I didn't know that. Only 3 days without water?
Yes, so after finding shelter from the sun or wind or rain, water is the next most important thing if you are lost and trying to survive in a harsh climate. And the desert is most definitely a harsh climate.
Tell me, Pamela, is it the same for camels?
Oh dear, no. We are much more hardy species than you humans. We can last up to 5 days in temperatures of more than 100 degrees. It is commonly believed that we store water in the humps of our backs. But this is, in fact, not true at all.
Really?
But camels do store water. Camels store water, not in the humps, but in our blood. A camel can drink up to 135 liters of water in one go. Much of this water can stay in our blood corpuscles, which can expand up to 240%. Humans can't drink a large amount of water in one go, since it would have adverse effects on your body. The camel's blood corpuscles serve as their water tank that could store ample amounts of water that could help them last for days in the desert without drinking.
Fascinating. It's too bad people can't store water like that. We have to carry it around in things like this. So we can only carry a little bit. The Hebrew people lived in the desert for 40 years. Luckily, their leader Moses knew where to find water in the desert. That's the story that we're going to hear right now. Do you want to hear that story too, Pamela?
Yes.
The whole Israelite community left the desert of Sin, moving from one place to another at the command of God. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water there to drink. They complained to Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses answered, "Why are you complaining? Why are you putting God to the test?" But the people were very thirsty and continued to complain to Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt? To kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" Moses prayed earnestly to the Lord and said, "What can I do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me." God said to Moses, "Take some of the leaders of Israel with you and go on ahead of the people. Take along the stick with which you struck the Nile. I will stand before you on a rock at Mount Sinai. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." Moses did so in the presence of the leaders of Israel. The place was called Massah and Meribah because the Israelites complained and put the Lord to the test when they asked, "Is God with us or not?" Phew, all this talk about water has made me really thirsty. And you know what, Pamela? It makes me think about an experiment that we could do right here in our Wonder Lab, and you kids can do at home too. All you need is a clear glass like this one, or a jar, some water, a piece of paper or cardstock, and a felt pen. Take your cardstock and your marker and draw an arrow on it, like so. Then you take the arrow and put it behind the jar. Now here's the science part. Watch what happens to the arrow as I pour the water into the glass. It changes direction. A neat trick of the eye? Sure, but there's a scientific explanation too. In physics, it's called refraction, or the bending of light. Anytime that light passes from one material into another, it refracts. So just now, the light traveled through the glass, through the water, through the back of the glass, and then back through the air before hitting the arrow. But just because light bends when it travels through different materials doesn't explain why the arrow reverses itself. To explain this, we have to think about the glass of water as if it's a magnifying glass. See how it makes the arrow bigger? When light goes through a magnifying glass, the light bends towards the center. Where the light all comes together is called the focal point. But beyond the focal point, the image appears to reverse because the light rays that were bent pass each other, and the light that was on the right side is now on the left, and the left is on the right. I know, pretty neat, hey? And in the story that we just heard, Moses knew something that the people didn't. How to find water in the desert, in rocks. That really surprised them. Sort of like the experiment that we just did, where the arrow miraculously changed directions. And in the story that the adults are going to hear after we leave for Sunday school, there's a surprising reversal of directions too. If you thought that was fun, you should come to our breakout Sunday school, Pamela.
That does sound like fun. But, what time will that be, Cheryl?
Like right now?
Then no. If you don't mind, Cheryl, I'm going back to sleep.
Okay, sure thing, Pamela. Sorry again about calling you in the middle of the night. Well, friends, do you want to come to Sunday school?